The body perceives truth before the mind understands it, because it is rooted in a deeper intelligence that does not rely on language, logic, or deliberate reasoning. While the mind constructs narratives, weighs possibilities, and searches for evidence, the body responds instantly to what is real, often before a single conscious thought has formed. This response can appear as a subtle tension, a sense of ease, a quickening heartbeat, or an inexplicable calm. These sensations are not random. They are signals arising from layers of awareness that have been shaped by experience, memory, and unconscious recognition. The mind, in its effort to protect and control, often interrupts this process. It questions what the body already knows, introducing doubt where there was once clarity. It asks for proof, for guarantees, for outcomes that can be predicted and managed. Yet the body does not operate within these constraints. It recognizes patterns long before they become visible to conscious awareness. It senses familiarity in a person, a situation, or a moment, even when the mind cannot yet identify why. This is because the body is intimately connected to the unconscious, where impressions are stored not as words but as feelings, images, and energetic imprints. Every meaningful encounter leaves a trace within this deeper layer. Over time, these traces form a kind of internal map, allowing the body to respond to subtle cues that the mind overlooks. A tone of voice, a glance, a presence, these are enough for the body to recognize something significant, something that resonates with past experiences or inner archetypes. When the body signals recognition, it does so with a quiet certainty that does not demand explanation. It does not argue or persuade. It simply presents a feeling that is either aligned or unsettled. This is why certain connections feel immediate and undeniable, even when they defy logic. The mind may attempt to rationalize or dismiss these sensations, but the body remains consistent in its response. There is also a temporal dimension to this knowing. The body does not perceive time in the same linear way as the mind. It holds on to experiences as living impressions, not as distant events. What has been deeply felt is not confined to the past. It remains active within the present moment. Because of this, the body can anticipate continuation where the mind sees only endings. It senses when something is unresolved, when a pattern has not completed itself, when a connection still carries movement within it. This anticipatory awareness is often mistaken for longing or imagination, yet it operates on a different level entirely. It is not driven by desire alone, but by recognition of incompleteness. The body does not cling to what is gone. It responds to what is still in motion beneath the surface. In this way, it perceives truth not as a fixed conclusion, but as an unfolding process that continues beyond what the mind can immediately comprehend. Unresolved connections tend to return in cycles, because what remains incomplete within the psyche does not simply dissolve with time. Instead, it lingers beneath conscious awareness, seeking resolution through repetition, reflection, and renewed encounter. The mind may interpret separation as an ending, a clear division between what was and what is no longer, yet the deeper layers of the self do not function in such definitive terms. They operate through patterns that persist until they are fully understood, integrated, or transformed. When a connection carries emotional intensity, symbolic meaning, or psychological depth, it imprints itself onto the unconscious. This imprint is not passive. It becomes active material within the psyche, influencing perception, behavior, and emotional response in ways that are often subtle but persistent. The individual may believe they have moved on, yet similar dynamics begin to reappear, either through the return of the same person or through encounters with others who evoke the same emotional landscape. These cycles are not accidental. They are expressions of an inner process that seeks completion. Each return, whether literal or symbolic, presents an opportunity to confront what was previously avoided, misunderstood, or left unresolved. The repetition is not meant to trap but to reveal. It draws attention to patterns that would otherwise remain hidden, allowing them to be seen with greater clarity over time. The cyclical nature of these connections often creates a sense of inevitability, as though certain people or experiences are bound to reappear regardless of conscious intention. This feeling arises because the unconscious does not recognize closure in the same way the conscious mind does. It does not accept declarations of finality if the underlying emotional or psychological material has not been fully processed. Instead, it continues to generate circumstances that bring the unresolved elements back into awareness. There is also a transformative aspect to these cycles. Each return is rarely identical to the last. Subtle changes occur, both within the individual and within the connection itself. These changes reflect the ongoing development of the psyche, as it gradually works through layers of meaning and emotional complexity. What once triggered confusion may later evoke insight. What once caused pain may eventually lead to understanding. The repetition can feel frustrating or even burdensome when viewed from the perspective of the conscious mind, which often seeks linear progress and clear resolution. However, from a deeper perspective, these cycles are part of a larger movement toward integration. They invite the individual to engage more consciously with their own patterns, to recognize the roles they play within recurring dynamics, and to take responsibility for their inner responses. In this way, the return of unresolved connections is not merely about external circumstances, but about internal alignment. The same connection may appear differently depending on the level of awareness brought to it. As understanding deepens, the nature of the cycle begins to shift, revealing new possibilities for response and perception. Emotional imprints live within the unconscious, not just memory, because what we feel deeply does not remain confined to a single moment in time or a clear narrative recollection. Instead, it becomes embedded in the deeper structure of the psyche, where it continues to influence perception, reaction, and inner experience without always revealing its origin. Memory, as the conscious mind understands it, is selective and often incomplete. It recalls events in fragments, reshaped by interpretation and time. But emotional imprints are different. They are preserved as living traces, carrying the intensity and essence of the original experience. These imprints are not stored as stories, but as felt realities. A particular emotion, once experienced with enough depth, becomes a reference point within the unconscious. It can be activated by subtle cues, a familiar tone, a gesture, a presence, without the mind immediately recognizing why the reaction feels so strong or so specific. In this way, the unconscious communicates through sensation rather than explanation, allowing past emotional experiences to re-emerge in the present without needing to be consciously remembered. Because these imprints exist beyond the reach of ordinary awareness, they often shape behavior in ways that seem automatic or instinctive. A person may feel drawn towards someone without understanding the source of that attraction, or they may experience discomfort in a situation that appears neutral on the surface. These responses are not arbitrary. They are guided by the emotional patterns that have been formed and stored over time. The unconscious does not distinguish sharply between past and present when it comes to these imprints. What has been deeply felt continues to exist as an active influence, ready to be reactivated whenever a similar emotional frequency is encountered. This is why certain connections feel charged with meaning from the very beginning. The intensity is not always about the present interaction alone, but about the resonance it creates with what already exists within the psyche. The other person becomes a mirror, reflecting something that has been waiting beneath the surface. This reflection can bring a sense of familiarity that is difficult to explain, as though the connection is rooted in something older than the current moment. At the same time, emotional imprints can create patterns that repeat across different relationships and experiences. The same emotional responses may arise in varied contexts, not because the situations are identical, but because they touch upon the same underlying imprint. Until these imprints are brought into awareness and understood, they continue to operate in the background, guiding perception and shaping reality in subtle but persistent ways. The unconscious does not seek to hide these imprints. Rather, it expresses them through repetition, intensity, and emotional resonance. It invites recognition, not through direct explanation, but through the consistent reappearance of certain feelings and dynamics. In this sense, emotional imprints are not static remnants of the past, but active elements of the present, continuously influencing how reality is experienced and interpreted. Separation often signals transformation, not finality, because what appears as an ending on the surface frequently conceals a deeper process unfolding beneath awareness. The mind is inclined to interpret distance, absence, or disconnection as a conclusion, something closed and complete, yet the psyche does not always move in straight lines. It withdraws, reconfigures, and reshapes itself in ways that are not immediately visible, using separation as a necessary condition for inner change. When two individuals part, it is rarely only the external bond that is affected. The separation activates internal movements within each person, stirring reflections, confrontations, and realizations that could not occur in the same way within the closeness of the connection. Proximity often maintains a certain dynamic, a rhythm that can obscure deeper truths. Distance, on the other hand, disrupts this rhythm, creating space for awareness to emerge. In that space, the individual is brought face to face with aspects of themselves that were previously projected onto the other. This process can feel disorienting because it removes the familiar reference point of the relationship. Without the constant presence of the other person, the individual is left with their own inner world, where unresolved emotions, unmet needs, and unexamined patterns begin to surface. What was once attributed to the relationship itself may now be recognized as part of a broader psychological landscape. In this sense, separation becomes a mirror, reflecting back what had been hidden within the interaction. Transformation requires this kind of interruption. Without it, patterns tend to repeat without awareness, reinforcing themselves through habit and familiarity. Separation breaks the continuity of these patterns, forcing a pause that allows for observation and change. It introduces a form of tension, a gap between what was and what is, and within that gap, new understanding can develop. This understanding is not always immediate or comfortable, but it gradually alters the way the individual relates to themselves and to others. There is also a temporal unfolding to this transformation. It does not occur all at once, but moves through stages, often marked by periods of confusion, clarity, resistance, and acceptance. During this time, both individuals may be undergoing their own distinct processes, shaped by their unique histories and inner structures. The separation creates the conditions for these processes to unfold independently, without the influence of the previous dynamic. What appears as absence is, in many ways, a form of preparation. It allows each person to encounter parts of themselves that were previously inaccessible, to develop insights that could not emerge within the original connection. The relationship, rather than ending, shifts into a different form within the psyche, continuing to exert influence as a catalyst for growth and reflection. Because of this, separation cannot always be understood as a definitive break. It is often a transition, a movement from one state of being to another, where the connection is temporarily withdrawn from the external world, so that it can be reworked internally, taking on new meaning as the individuals involved undergo their own transformations. True certainty feels calm, not desperate or forceful, because it arises from a deeper alignment within the psyche, rather than from the restless activity of the mind. When something is genuinely known on an inner level, it does not demand constant reassurance or validation. It exists quietly, without urgency, without the need to convince or to control outcomes. This form of certainty is often subtle, almost understated, yet it carries a stability that is not easily disturbed by external circumstances. In contrast, what is often mistaken for certainty is driven by anxiety, attachment, or fear of loss. It manifests as a need to grasp, to secure, to hold tightly to a particular outcome or person. This forceful energy does not emerge from clarity, but from insecurity, from a sense that something essential might slip away if it is not actively maintained. The mind in this state becomes loud and insistent, generating thoughts that circle endlessly around the same concerns, seeking confirmation where none can truly satisfy it. Calm certainty operates differently. It does not rush. It does not attempt to impose itself on reality. Instead, it allows events to unfold, trusting in a deeper order that does not need to be managed at every moment. This does not mean passivity or indifference, but rather a grounded presence that remains steady even in the face of uncertainty. The individual may not know every detail of what will happen, yet there is a sense that whatever unfolds will align with a larger process. This feeling often emerges from a connection to the unconscious, where insights arise not through deliberate reasoning, but through an integration of experience, emotion, and intuition. When the psyche is aligned in this way, there is less internal conflict. The different layers of the self are not pulling in opposing directions, and as a result, the sense of knowing feels cohesive and whole. It is not fragmented by doubt or driven by competing desires. Because calm certainty is not dependent on immediate outcomes, it does not fluctuate dramatically with changing circumstances. It can coexist with ambiguity, allowing space for multiple possibilities without losing its center. This is why it feels different from hope or expectation. Hope often leans toward a desired future, and expectation carries an implicit demand. But calm certainty simply exists, independent of whether the desired outcome is immediately visible. There is also a quality of patience within this state. It recognizes that certain processes require time, that not everything can or should be resolved instantly. This patience is not forced, it arises naturally from the absence of inner pressure. The individual does not feel compelled to act prematurely or to seek constant reassurance because the underlying sense of knowing remains intact. In this way, true certainty reveals itself not through intensity, but through quiet consistency, a steady presence that does not need to announce itself loudly in order to be real. Growth matters more than whether the person returns, because the deeper movement taking place is not centered on the external outcome, but on the internal transformation that unfolds through the experience itself. When a connection leaves a strong impact, it often initiates a process within the individual that extends far beyond the presence or absence of the other person. This process begins to reshape perception, challenge existing patterns, and bring previously unconscious material into awareness. The mind may fixate on the question of return, treating it as the ultimate resolution, as though the reappearance of the person would restore balance or provide closure. Yet this focus can obscure the more significant development that is already underway. The experience of connection, separation, and reflection creates conditions in which the individual is compelled to confront aspects of themselves that may have remained hidden under ordinary circumstances. These confrontations are not incidental, they are central to the process of growth. As this inner work unfolds, the individual begins to recognize recurring emotional patterns, habitual responses, and deeply held assumptions about relationships and identity. What once felt automatic may now be seen with greater clarity. This awareness introduces the possibility of change, allowing the individual to respond differently rather than simply repeating established dynamics. In this way, growth becomes an active reconfiguration of the self, rather than a passive reaction to external events. The question of whether the person returns gradually loses its central importance as this transformation deepens. It does not disappear entirely, but it shifts in meaning. Instead of being the defining factor of the experience, it becomes one of many possible outcomes, none of which determine the value of the process. The individual begins to understand that what was awakened within them has its own significance, independent of how the external situation resolves. This shift in perspective also alters the nature of desire. The longing for a specific outcome may soften, replaced by a broader openness to whatever aligns with the individual's continued development. This does not imply detachment in the sense of indifference, but rather a reorientation toward what is internally necessary rather than externally desired. The individual becomes less focused on restoring what was and more attuned to becoming what they are in the process of unfolding into. There is a form of empowerment in this realization. When growth is recognized as the primary movement, the individual is no longer dependent on another person's actions to feel complete or resolved. The experience retains its meaning regardless of whether the connection is renewed, transformed, or left behind. The focus shifts from seeking fulfillment through the return of the other to embodying the changes that the experience has initiated. In this way, the value of the connection is measured not by its duration or its outcome, but by its capacity to provoke transformation, to deepen awareness, and to initiate a process that continues to evolve within the individual.